Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our laser scanning and researching the Cocoa Beach Glass Bank, better understanding idealized design versus function in a structure presentation. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Lori Walters.
Well, hi. Thank you for inviting me. This is a pleasure. I wanted to introduce, I am Lori Walters. I am a research associate professor at the School of Modeling, Simulation, and Training and the Department of History here at the University of Central Florida. So one of the things that I do, I enjoy obviously researching historical topics here in Florida and mid-century modern topics across the country. But one of the things that we've been doing is we've been laser scanning structures, and we have been providing life histories of these structures. So let me tell you really quick what a life history of a building is first, and then we'll go on and we'll show you laser scanning and how it works and what the final products are of this and how valuable it can be in a historic site preservation and just the historical record in general. All right, so a life history. Think of every building. Every building has a life, just like a human does. It has its inception when an architect and engineers think about what they want to design. So they put it down on paper, and they have their blueprints and everything. And so there is its inception. And then it has its actual birth, and that birth comes through all those construction workers that take everything from that two-dimensional piece of paper and actually make it into a three-dimensional building. Okay. But after that, you also have the life, the breadth of the building, the life of the building, where people who visit it, people who work in it, people who live in it, depending upon the type of building that it is. And then, of course, ultimately, almost every building will have a death. Sometimes the death will be in 10 years, sometimes it's in 50 years, sometimes it's 5 or 6 or 700 years. But ultimately, each building will have its demise. And what we try to do, we have the ChronoPoints initiative here. And what we try to do at ChronoPoints is we try to make sure that before that last entity occurs, before its demolition or significant modification. And a significant modification is sometimes you will find a building that is still the building per se, but its face changes, the facade changes. And so when that occurs, it's no longer like what it looked in 1962. It looks like what they wanted to make it more update, make it look like it's in 2021. And so when that occurs, you also want to document that change, because that is a moment in the building's life history. So how do we accomplish a life history? So life history is accomplished in many different ways. I mean, one is going to be the laser scan, and what a laser scan is a device that has as the name suggests, it has a laser, and the laser will send out and it'll hit an object, and any object. So if you look here in my office, when the laser on the laser scanner goes around, it'll hit every single little thing that you see here, and it'll come back. And then what it is able to do is do a three-dimensional representation of this space. But you have to take several laser scans in order to tie them together to get a really good understanding of what that space is and have a record of the space. And it can be very, very accurate depending upon the settings that you use, depending upon the laser scanner that you have. We're talking about you can laser scan the exterior of a building, and it can be up to 2 millimeters in accuracy. And that is incredible, because what you can do with that is if you wanted to change a building, you need accurate representation of what the dimensions of the building is. Or if you wanted to do something, if you're try to figure out if a large piece of equipment is going to fit into an area in a building, you want to do a laser scan of that area. You also want to do a laser scan of, as you're moving the building, moving that large object out from outside to inside, to make sure that you can actually get it to where you intend it to be. Laser scanners are also used for crime scene investigation. When you want an accurate representation of what a crime scene looked like, a 3D representation, they bring out the laser scanners. It's used a lot in engineering. So, there's a lot of uses for laser scanning other than for the historical record. But being a historian, obviously, that's what I'm going to use it for. So we do a laser scan. So we get that accurate representation of what that building looked like on that day. All right. So then what do? So you got to find, you have to do photography. So the next thing that we do is we go out with a nice camera and we take pictures of the building. And we're not just taking elevation shots. We do that, but we also are taking texture photos, detail photos. And you say, well, what is a texture photo and what is a detail photo? Well, a texture photo is that everything, I'm trying to find something here that has a cool texture on it. Okay. So this FedEx envelope has a texture on it. Or the carpeting on the floor here, it has a texture to it. It's how it looks. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that we capture that texture so that when we do a 3D representation of it in Maya or 3D Studio Max, that we have all of these colors. And speaking of colors, the other thing that we do is we have this little device here and this little cube here. We go up to a wall that's painted. And it doesn't work if it's, like many different colors really close together. But if you're talking about a painted wall, you put this on the wall and it'll come up and it'll report on your phone what the color is. So now you've got an accurate representation of the precise color. So we do all these kinds of things. Then the next thing you have to do is you got to try to find blueprints, because blueprints give you the best idea of what the architect intended. Blueprints, as-built drawings, things of that nature. And so they try to, so when you acquire those, and a blueprint is think of it's a large piece of paper and it has line drawings on it, and it gives you all the dimensions and everything of like, and where doors are located and the ceiling heights and all of that. And so you want to see if you can acquire that. Sometimes the owner of the building may have it. Other times you may have to go to the city or the county in order to acquire it, or the architect may actually still have them. The next thing that you want to do when you conduct that life history is you want to try to find historic images. So you got to try to find, an image of what a building looked like. Let's say it was constructed in 1962. You want to find images of what it looked like in 1962, 63, 65, yada, 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 until we get down into, recent images. Okay, then you try to find ephemera. And ephemera, surprisingly enough, will provide you a lot of really interesting information. So you say, well, what's ephemera? So ephemera is something like, let me see here. Okay. Ephemera is like this. It's our Space Needle panorama. And inside of this, it tells us all this neat stuff about the Space Needle and about Seattle in 1962 and the World's Fair and all that kind of stuff. So you can get a lot of really good information from that. Ephemera may also be a postcard. So it could be a postcard. And on the back side of that postcard, it may say something really interesting. Somebody may have sent this in 1962. And on the back of it, it may say, we visited this building today and man, was it cool. So that gives me a lot of interesting and neat information that I can use for the historical record. And it could also be something like an ashtray or an old motel key. So these two things are also interesting pieces of ephemera that we try to find. And we may not, and when we find this, we may not, keep the three-dimensional artifact. What we may do is just take photographs of it, or we now have a small handheld structured light scanner, which is akin to the laser scanner, but a little different in how it operates. But it'll take a 3D representation of this for us that we might be able to put into a game or something of that nature. So all of these little artifacts, help us in getting clues about the history of the building, but also making, if we do a 3D representation of it, giving us, some more accuracy about if I was making an old motel, a 1962 motel in Cocoa Beach, when I have this key sitting on, we have a Maya model, and I have this key sitting on a desk, I want it to look like that motel's key actually did, not just some generic key. So these things are all very, very important. So after that, you say, all right, so you've got all of this stuff. There's one more piece of the puzzle. And that piece of the puzzle is the human element. And so we try to go out and do oral histories with people. If the architect is still living, we try to talk with the architect. If the architect is no longer with us, maybe we speak with individuals who were at that architectural firm who may have known that architect and can give me information about what they thought about that building and its successes and its failures. We talk with people who, if it's an apartment complex or a home, we obviously talk with people who lived in the building. If it's a commercial structure, we talk to people who worked there and who visited there. If it's a restaurant, restaurants are great because you have people who are working there. You have your servers and you have your bartenders and you have your individuals that are working in the back of the house as cooks and such. But you also have a constant changing group of people that are coming to visit it. And if it's a 1960s building and a restaurant and they had a dance floor or something, you might even be able to get to talk to some people who actually sang or entertained in some fashion at that structure. And so they all give us a piece of the puzzle. And the great thing about that, rather than artifacts and photographs and documents, of course, documents we try to take, we try to find as well. They can give you a little bit of personal information about it, what they thought about it. That maybe the building had this horrible, light that came in, from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and it just made it like an oven in that building to work in. Or maybe that the building had, leaks in it, and the sound from the air coming through was just horrendous. Or that they had leakage problems with the windows with rain, and that they always had problems. I mean, these are all very valuable pieces of information if you want to understand what the success of the building was and what some of the design failures of the building were. So that's what we do when we conduct a life history. It's not just a one shot. We run in with the laser scanner before the building's torn down. We try to document everything. All right. So let me show you now the laser scanner. Now I'm going to be showing you. We have a variety of laser scanners here, and each laser scanner has its strength and its weaknesses. Some are that they're very small and compact, and therefore it's easy for you to transport. You can take them on the plane with you easily. You can put them under the seat. It's no problem. They're very lightweight, so one person can easily operate them. Some are very fast, so that and if you only have one day on site to laser scan, because remember, you just can't go up to a building and say, well, we're going to laser scan this. You have to talk to the owners and everything so you can get, all the way around the structure. And if they say you can only have one day on site, well, that's all you can have. And if that's the case, then you have to take with you your fastest scanner. It may not be your most accurate scanner, but it's your fastest scanner because all you have is one day. All right. Or you may need a survey grade laser scanner. And that's the laser scanner that if I were an engineer and I was going to add on to a building, I would want that laser scanner because that is going to provide me with the most accurate dimensions of what that building is today. And that's going to help me when I want to add on or whether we're going to change the facade or whatever the case may be. So you got to think of all of these things when you're getting ready to conduct a laser scan. And so we're going to show you right now. Rob is going to start the RTC 360. This is a Leica RTC 360. And this laser scanner is exceptional for a number of reasons. The first is its size. So let me show you here real quick. Okay, so as you can see, it's I think you can see it. Yes. It's a nice size. Rob, stand next to it real quick so they can get an idea of its size to you in your hand. Okay, so
there's the iPad.
Yeah, so there's the iPad. So that gives you an idea of its actual dimensions and everything. And by the way, Rob is Dr. Robert Miklowitz, who is a postdoctoral associate here at IST. And so this is a good laser scanner in relation to its size. Another great thing about this scanner is that it's fast. It is a very fast scanner. So we can set this to where it can scan in 1 minute and 26 seconds. And the longest one is what? If it's a single scan, 2 minutes and 242, yeah, 242, and then if we do a double scan, it's a little bit longer than that. Yeah, but in essence, you know, even if we put it on its longest, it's just it's under 5 minutes per scan, which is really important, especially if you have lots of scans that you want to do. The other nice thing about this particular scanner is that it has the ability to track itself from scan to scan. And you say, well, you know, why is you getting ready to start it? Okay, let's run through a quick scan, and then I'll tell you about the tracking and the registration capabilities of this. So let's see here. Okay, so let's go ahead, and so Rob's going to just hit it on. It also has the ability that you don't have to push a button on the scanner. It can actually be started through the iPad. So that means if you need to put this on a high place, you don't have to be standing up there with it. You can just put it, you can walk away from it, and where you are, boop, hit the button and it goes. So hit that button and let it go. So you'll hear the scanner. This is one of the downsides, one of the few downsides of the scanner. It sounds like an aircraft is taking off. So if you're in a quiet area, like in a library or something, you'd have to do this after hours. Because you wouldn't want this running while you're in a library or maybe in an office place where people are trying to work. That's the only downside to this. But other than that, I mean, it provides a wonderful scan. It's very fast. And again, the ability to go from scan to scan and have it track where it is from where it is at this location to the next location. It helps you with the pre-registration of the larger point cloud. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is a laser scan provides a point cloud. So it isn't really providing it's providing a three-dimensional model, but it is millions and billions of little points put together, because what the scanner does is that laser goes out, picks everything, points come back, and from that, it puts together a 3D representation of that. The last thing that it'll do, if you want it to, is it'll take a picture, a 360-degree photograph. And with that, then they take the colors from every one of those points, those billions and billions of points that is put together, and it makes them in color. So now you've got a nice 3D representation in color. But again, it's over. Okay, it's done. So now this right here, if you can see this, this gives you, this is just one of the scans. Now, remember, this is not really the scan. This is just telling you, but you see, it's already figured out the dimensions of my office. It already knows where the walls are and everything. And then we knows where the scanner is. And it knows where the scanner is, because you see it little blinking there, the little red light, it's blinking. And then if we were to move it over to the other side of the room, it would then, we would make a connection between the two, and we'd start building our true three-dimensional point cloud. So when we build that point cloud, can we just take it and make a Maya model from it? No, you can't. It's not a mesh model yet. It has to be meshed. But the software can do that. So it will take all those points and that configuration of all those billions of points, and it can make it into a mesh model. And that is what you can use to make you want to do this. I don't know why you'd want to do my trackball, but if you wanted to, you can put that trackball in Unreal or Unity, and you can put it into your game scene or whatever you wanted to do. But it will allow you to do that once it's been meshed. And again, remember those textures that I was telling you about? That is why you want to take all those special textures of a terrazzo floor and how unique the patterns are, the unique patterns of a carpet, the unique patterns of a mosaic on a wall or something like that. Or if there's a painting on a wall, you want to make sure that you get a nice photograph, couple photographs of that painting, so that when you want to put it maybe into Unity or Unreal in your game environment, that you have a beautiful image of that, rather than just from the laser scan. So, okay, All right, so I've showed you what a couple, you know, the laser scanner itself. Now let me show you when we put it together in it's been put together in the proprietary software. And once that's done, you can turn it and we can put it online. And now I've got to show, okay, I am sharing my screen. So can you see that, Jessica, where it says the Jack Kerouac house?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, all righty. So this is in Poetry. Now what Poetry enables you to do is take the laser scan point cloud. Now remember, this is just points. This is not a mesh model yet. It enables you to take that point cloud of all of those scans that have been put together. So, Rob, do you remember how many scans we did with Jack Kerouac house? It was in the 30s, wasn't it? I think now there might be. Right? Yeah, so exterior, we probably did maybe upper 20s then. So this is probably in the upper 20s scans that we did. So as you see, it gives you a 3D representation of the structure and everything's around it. The trees, the power lines, you know, if a bird flew by or sitting on the chimney, it'll take that too, and you can cut it out if you so choose. And so let me walk you inside, because we don't have the inside of the house here in this Poetry, but you'll get an understanding that as I move closer and closer, this is just a bunch of points. See, that's just just millions and millions of points that have been put together that look like it's an actual 3D model. And from this point cloud, I can measure from point A to point B, and I can get an accurate understanding within 2 millimeters accuracy of what that is from point A to point B. So, you know, from an engineering standpoint, this is a very valuable item to have. So let me take you now to the Cocoa Beach Glass Bank, because people have a tendency to say that I really, really like the Cocoa Beach Glass Bank, and it's so true. So I'm going to close the Jack Kerouac house out, and I'm going to show you the Cocoa Beach Glass Bank. So let me see here. So I'm going to go to our project page real quick, and then I'm going to go to the Glass Bank. Okay, so, you know, here I have a little history of it and everything in the timeline. And so we have some photographs, and they're based on, you know, what they represent. So this is what the glass bank looked like in 1962 when it was first constructed. And the architect was Reginald Knight. And while it's called the Cocoa Beach Glass Bank, it's actually the first Federal Savings and Loan Association, COCA of Cocoa Beach branch. So it's not really a bank technically. Technically, it was a savings and loan. And so, but people, you know, still called it the glass bank because it, as you see, looks like glass, and it's easier to sit there and say Cocoa Beach Glass Bank rather than constantly saying Cocoa Beach Savings and Loan. So people have a tendency to call it that. So this is a nice postcard from the period. So it gives you an idea of what it looked like. And we've got some stuff here on how it was constructed and stuff. Now, later, what we have is in 1965, the glass bank actually was modified a little bit. And so they moved out the walls, and they got on the top floor here. So let me use this one here. And they actually got rid of this nice walkway. What this was, and the uniqueness of this bank is that you have the ground level where the bank is. Then you had this mezzanine level here, which was basically a relaxing spot, you know, where people could relax, and they would have their coffee machines and everything there. Then you had office space on the second floor and the third floor, and the fourth floor was a restaurant. Well, what they found in 1965 is that while this outside skyway, this walkway, was really nice for people to go out and take a look at the ocean or the Banana River, or to go out there to see a missile launch, because remember, Cocoa Beach is just, you know, a few miles south of Cape Canaveral. And what's happening in Cocoa Beach and what's happening in Cape Canaveral in 1962, 63, 64, we're having missile launches and we're having manned space flight launches. Because remember, John Glenn launches February 20th, 1962. So this is a great vantage point for you to go see a missile launch. You know, it's really ideal. But the problem is that they found out that this really didn't give them enough floor space for their tables to, so what they did is they pushed out the walls to the edge here, and lo and behold, we have a modified building. But what we found over time is that, well, and here's the modification. So here's the modification. See how they pushed out those walls, see? And just see where the old arches were. They pushed out those walls. And this changes the structure, quite a bit. But then they found over the years, and there was a hurricane, and that blew out quite a few of the, in fact, no, excuse me, a tornado. And here's some of the tornado damage to the glass bank. It blew out a number of windows and such. And then they found that over time, those windows were really a problem. It made it so hot in the bank, and they had so many leakage problems. What they elected to do in the early 1980s was do a significant modification. And so they put concrete, literally concrete, over a number of these areas. And this is how the glass bank looked just prior to its demolition. Now, at that time, we used the Faro S120 laser scanner. That's what you see right there. And you'll notice something else on this glass bank. Well, in the early 1980s, when they're making this modification, because you notice, remember, all this was glass, all this was glass. This you didn't see. This is a condo unit for an individual in Cocoa Beach, and that was placed on top of it. So this photograph was taken in December of 2014, just prior to the building's demolition in January of 2015. And so what we did is we were allowed, the city of Cocoa Beach permitted us to go in and conduct this laser scan of the exterior. And so we did the scan of the exterior. And so this is an actual laser scan. This is the point cloud of the laser scan. So this is us putting together all the exterior scans that we did. And a laser scanner can only scan what it sees. And this is really critical. That's why you have to take your scanner and place it in different spots, because if it was laser scanning the items on my desk, it can see this side of my Coca-Cola bottle, but it can't see this side of my Coca-Cola bottle or whatever else I have on my desk. So as a result of that, I have to have the scanner in several spots. And with the glass bank, this was a little challenging because we had to scan everything that was on the outside. So we had to do a circle around the bank, but then we also had to do a circle underneath these arches because we couldn't see what was on the other side of the arches sufficiently if we only did that circle around the building. So when you're conducting a laser scan, this isn't just you saying, well, I'm going to take my scanner and blah, 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 5 scans, it's done. You've got to take into consideration all the things that might be blocking your laser scan. Overhangs, trees, shrubbery, water features, the glass itself. If it's a highly reflective glass, how is this going to impact my laser that is going out and hitting it and coming back? What it's going to mean is that you're going to have a lot of noise in your scan, and that means that you're going to have to go back and do a lot of cleanup and take out these little points that are floating in the air because of the reflection and the refraction coming off of those light surfaces. Okay, so what did we do now? We have all of this information. We've laser scanned the glass bank and all of that. So let me show you ultimately what we did with the glass bank. So this here is oops, let me close that out. This here is a 3D representation of the glass bank that was done in Maya. So remember, the laser scan could only scan what it looked like just prior to its demolition. And so you say, well, how could that be a valuable tool in you wanting to return a building to 1962? Because this is how the building looked. Technically, actually, this is how the building looked in 1963. And the reason I can say that is, you see the elevator there that's on the outside? Well, one of the things that we found when we talked to folks that had worked in this bank is that, and this was a design flaw that the architect really maybe wasn't thinking of at the time, that you need to get to the restaurant in the evening hours. This was a nightclub type restaurant. It was open for lunch and it was open till late in the evening hours. The problem was, and it was on the fourth floor, the problem was the way you got to that restaurant was via the elevator that was inside the building, and it's a savings and loan. So that means that you have to have on guard, on the clock all the time in the evening hours while restaurant employees are coming in and out, while patrons are coming in and out. They had to have a guard always inside that bank building because there was no way for them to get in up to the fourth floor without going actually into the bank. So how did they think around this? They said, okay, in 1963, they said, we really need to resolve this issue. We'll put an outside elevator in. Whoop, that's what you see there. So what we have here is this outside elevator that you could actually go up to, if I can steer myself correctly, and lo and behold, there you go. And it takes you up to the restaurant. So now this model here, like I said, we use the laser scan was very important for us because the building had very unique angles to it, like these arches. These arches, we couldn't have done these arches accurately only from photograph if we didn't have the laser scanner. So the laser scanner enabled us to have accurate angles on the arches. And it also, even though the structure had changed and you saw that the concrete was on the outside, the angles, the slope and everything of this building was still accurate because we had the laser scan to continually compare the model as the model is being constructed, this mesh model is being constructed. We had photographs. The photographs enabled us with the laser scan that was taken in 2015. When we take those historic photographs and we put them all together, that enabled us to do this building. And then inside, we didn't have many photographs of the inside of the building. We had some photographs of the restaurant, which one would expect. People were dining and they take pictures of anniversary parties or birthday parties or whatever, and also postcards that Ramon's Rainbow Room, and that was the name of the restaurant. They had postcards, and so we had interior photographs of that. But we didn't have any real interior photographs of the inside. So that's where the oral history became very valuable to us, because we spoke with people who worked in this bank, and they helped us determine what kind of counter space we had here, the location of it, because it had changed a little bit from the 60s to the 80s as the bank evolved and changed. And we also found out that they had Barcelona chairs in it. Now, a Barcelona chair in 1962 cost about $750 a chair. Now that's a lot of money if you were going to put in a bank, waiting area today, but you got to multiply that probably close to 8.5 to get its value in today's dollars. That is one expensive chair that they had. And so we had no idea of the types of chairs that they had in there. And so what we did is we found books from the 1960s, and we asked people to thumb through these books and point out the chairs. And we got a consensus. And they also putting together the visualization that they pointed out and the amount that they were recalling, that these were in fact real Barcelona chairs that they had put in here. So that's telling me how important this structure was to the first First Federal Savings Loan Association of COCO. This was their statement that they were an important organization. They would continue to grow and grow with the growth of the space program and the impact that was going to have on surrounding community, especially a community like Cocoa Beach, which was between Cape Canaveral at the north and Patrick Air Force Base to the south. Cocoa Beach was destined to grow and grow and grow and become a very important community. in 1960s America. And in fact, it did culturally. Culturally, there is, you would be surprised in how many um, times in motion pictures or television programs or in articles, Cocoa Beach was mentioned. And of course, we can all go back to the old television show I Dream of Jeannie, which was from September 18th of 1965 to September 2nd of 1970. It aired on NBC. Where did Major Nelson live? Major Nelson should have been living in Houston because that's where astronauts lived at that moment in time. Major Nelson wasn't living in Houston. Major Nelson was living with Jeannie in Cocoa Beach. And that says a lot of how important that community was in American popular culture in the 1960s. And so what did we find out as we walked through the bank? We found out, this is amazing, that this bank building was actually designed. So this is a private, so everything that's over here that you can see belonged to the bank itself. That's where the bankers' offices were and stuff like that. So the president, the vice president of the bank, and bank officials were. But this behind this is what do you call that glass like you have in your showers that you can't see through it? It's not frosted glass. Thank you. So this is frosted glass, and this is frosted glass. So these offices would be private. Notice that there's no way to enter them from inside the bank. You got to run outside, and oh, here's that elevator that I was telling you about. So that the bank, they had to have that guard about. The only way that you could get to those offices were from the outside. Okay, so what's the problem with this office? Well, if we could get on the mezzanine level, which I can't climb up to, but if we could, and the mezzanine level, you can see by that rail right there, that runs around the entire first floor, just above it. You know what? The offices, these private offices, didn't have a ceiling. So that meant that you could be on that mezzanine level, looking down in somebody's office, and lots of kids went up there and did spitballs, all kinds of other things down on people's heads and on their desks and stuff. And so they found out very early on, and we found out this only through the oral histories, not through blueprints or anything. We found this only through the oral histories, that they had to modify this building. And it was a design failure. It was great because what they wanted people to be able to sit in their office and have this really cool office where they could look up and they could see, above them, and they weren't, they weren't like my office has the ceiling, and so I can only look up at the ceiling. They wanted people to be able to look up and see out of that wonderful glass enclosure, but it was a design failure. It was a design flaw that they had to rework. They had to put in a drop ceiling like this. Another thing that we found out through the oral histories was that these windows that you see here, as beautiful as they are, and the amount of sun and everything that it allows to come in and allows you to see everything outside and everything, they leaked like a sieve. 1962 technology was not prepared. Sealant technology was not prepared for all of this movement and the heat and the cool and the heat and the cool, and before you know it, all of a sudden the sealant, they didn't have the type of caulkings like we have today. And what we found out that this was actually a design flaw. And so one of the ways that they got around it, the water kept leaking and leaking and leaking up to this mezzanine, and the mezzanine is right above our heads here. So the mezzanine is right above our heads. So what they did is they had to go to the mezzanine level, and inside in the mezzanine level, they actually drilled holes in the floor right to the ceiling here, which is, the top, to let all the water out. So that's a really nice design flaw that we found out through the oral histories and talking with people and running them through this visualization. We also found out that this is a north-south building. So this is the southern exposure, and this is the northern exposure. What we found is thanks to all of the heat that's coming through the southern exposure, people that worked on that southern side of the building, they were like, oh my gosh, it's hot, it's hot, it's hot, it's hot. And they had to keep cranking the air conditioning up and cranking the air conditioning up to make it, palatable for them. But as they're doing that, we found out that the folks that are on this side of the building are having to wear sweaters and everything all the time because they're cold because of the amount of air conditioning that's blowing on them, which they don't need because it's a northern facing side. So, we did determine that there were echo problems, horrific echo problems. Again, this big open space was again beautiful and really nice for you visually to experience. But we also found that if you were here, a teller chatting with somebody, people on the mezzanine level could hear what you were saying, and vice versa. That people on the mezzanine level, if you were up there chatting, people downstairs could hear you easily. So there were a number of flaws that this building was designed for its beauty, and I think really to push the limits of what the building materials of the time could do. But unfortunately, as a result, it had some serious flaws in that design. And so, and those flaws, the only way we could have found them out was by chatting with the people. And that's one of the reasons why I think it is so very important, why I focus on mid-century buildings. And I like mid-century modern buildings, but I will do mid-century buildings in general. And the important thing about this is that, we are reaching a point where a lot of the individuals who have the reflections from buildings that were in the 1950s and 1960s, they're passing. And so it is very, very important. And now we're moving up even into the 70s. We're going to start scanning a lot more structures from the 70s because we have to grab their memories now, because documents, if we're lucky, we'll find. Postcards, we'll find. Things like that. We can find those elements of the life history. But the one thing that we can't recreate is when someone's passes on, their memory goes with them. And that is a very, very important thing. So for me, laser scanning historic structure from the 1920s or from 700 years ago is a very valuable thing, because it can tell me, if I laser scan a building today, and then I come back and I laser scan that building in a year or 2 or 3 years, the laser scan can tell me if there's structural problems with that building. If an engineer looks at it, they can maybe start to see shifts, they can start to see cracks, they can start to see changes in the structure. That's very, very important for an older building. But for me, I want that human connection. And so that's why we focus on buildings from the 50s, 60s, and now into the 70s. And so that's pretty much really what we do in ChronoPoints, and the laser scanning and the life history of a structure, and how, and this is just one example. I mean, there are many buildings that are pushing the boundaries of engineering that are built every day. And in fact, I just saw that one, the Park Avenue skyscraper, the very narrow one. It pushed the boundaries of engineering, and now that it's been around for a number of years, they too are starting to talk to people who live in it, who work in it, and they are starting to see where some of the flaws were. So it really brings to the forefront of how important when you are building a structure that really is pushing those architectural and engineering boundaries, how important it is to ultimately come back and speak to folks that really had to interface with that building. They either lived there, they worked there, they visited there, or whatever. But that human element will help you determine what some of those flaws are, as will if you were to, and one of the best sources also is the people who work in the structure in the maintenance. The maintenance people are some of the best, because they're there every day having to deal with that leak or that elevator that isn't working, or the complaints from somebody who's working or living in the building. They have to deal with it every day. And so they too, you have to make sure that when you conduct that life history, they are high on your list of folks to chat with. And so I will turn it over to any questions that you all may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walters.
Thank you.
So one quick question I have is, do you find that mid-century buildings are more architecturally ambitious than the modern buildings are?
You know, I wouldn't say that they, because there's some new buildings now that you look at them and go, and being a historian, mind you, and I'm not an engineer, I scratch my head and I say, my God, how'd they do that? So there are some very, very ambitious buildings, but what I think you see in the 1950s and 1960s is you see a sense of what's the term? Positive outlook as to what the future is going to be, optimism. And you see this incredible optimism when you're coming after the Second World War. Economically speaking, the United States, is doing well in the 1950s and 1960s. You see the rise of things like the space program and stuff like that. So I think what you're seeing is an incredible optimism that is reflected back in those buildings and new building materials that are coming out and them trying to figure out how can we work with these new building materials. And also you have the suburban spread. You're moving out of the urban areas, moving out of the cities, and you're moving into areas that are fresh territory, so to speak. It's not that you're tearing down a building to replace it with this new structure. It's you have this it's like a clean slate almost. And especially in places like Cocoa Beach, this clean slate was you see they had a small, downtown Cocoa Beach, before the 50s and 60s. But what we start to see in the 50s and 60s is everything with the space age theme to it, in appearance and in names. The Astrocraft Motel, the Satellite Motel, the Gemini Room in the lounge, and all of these things. And so all of the Polaris, and such. And things have the Apollo building, in Cocoa Beach there was the Apollo building, which of course is reflective of Apollo. There's the Saturn building, which of course is reflective of the booster for the Apollo program. So in Cocoa Beach and communities and younger suburban communities like it, that did not have a lot of growth before the war, you have this incredible optimism of what the future is going to be. And I always like to look back, I always like to use as the example the city of Titusville. And so the city of Titusville is across from, so you have Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, then you have the Banana River, then you have the Merritt Island Launch Area, which is the Kennedy Space Center today, then you have the Indian River, and on the mainland is the city of Titusville. And it, like Cocoa Beach, was impacted significantly from the influx of workers for the space program in the 1950s, and for them, particularly in the 1960s. So in 1967, it's the centennial celebration for the city of Titusville, and a new city hall is constructed at that year, and it wasn't constructed for the centennial, but it happened to be constructed during their centennial, and they're looking at this moment to what their past 100 years was and what their next 100 years were going to be. And if you look at the city hall in Titusville, it is a remarkable building. It tells me that in 1967, they thought that their future was unending. It was going to be bright and unending. The space program was going to continue, more and more missions. They had no idea. They didn't have a glass ball in 1967 to look forward and say, that ultimately the Nixon administration was going to cancel Apollo 18, 19, and 20, and that there was going to be this incredible economic downside, this slide in the 1970s for Brevard County until the space shuttle comes back online. And they didn't have that glass ball. So if you look at that building, their city hall, it really is reflective of their hopes, their dreams, and their aspirations of what they thought the future was going to be. And I think it's a wonderful example, as are many of the buildings that were constructed in these communities that were impacted by the space and missile industry in the 1950s and 60s here in Brevard County. And I'm sure elsewhere as well. I'm sure in Huntsville and in League City in Texas, which is right outside where the Johnson Space Center is and such. I'm sure that they had a similar influx of this mid-century aspirations as to what they thought the future was going to be as a result of the space and missile industry. Mm-hmm.
So Lori, I'm intrigued, and I'm gonna ask you maybe to just reflect and respond to this statement, because we think of a building as the built, it's done environment, but historians are really the social memory in a living sense of the fact that buildings really are simply the shell the shell around human activity. That's what's happening in that building. Yeah. So
and they evolve as everything changes. If a community like a community like Cocoa Beach, so I'm going to go back to Cocoa Beach again. There was Pan Am Corporation. They used to be the ones who were in Pan Am was a major airline company, and they were the airline company. That them at TWA. I mean, you said Pan Am, and people were impressed when you were flying Pan Am to Europe. But they also did the maintenance out at Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral. I'll say Cape Kennedy constantly, but it's Cape Canaveral. And they had a headquarters building for their activities in Cocoa Beach. And so in the 1970s, ultimately, when they were no longer the contractor for that, that building sat vacant for a while. And it was turned into condominiums. So they turned it into condominiums. So the building evolved with the changing needs of the community.
And what's interesting is you wonder if anybody currently living in the building now has any idea of the history of what the building and the surrounding, land was used for before they bought their condo.
I'm sure the majority do not. There might be some folks that have lived in Cocoa Beach for a prolonged period of time that saw it or heard of it. But I'm sure the vast majority probably are unaware that what they're living in at one time was the old Pan Am and had with the Apollo building as well. The Apollo building was turned into something different. There was an IBM building in the city of Cape Canaveral that just recently changed again.
Wow.
And it was remarkable because the facade of it, most people probably are old enough to remember what an IBM punch card looked like, but it had these little punches in it. And the facade of the building, the windows were shaped like the punches in an IBM punch card, and it was the IBM building. And so the facade is now changed.
How cool.
It's gone. But it was, it was reflective of that. And as the community's needs changed, and Brevard County has changed. I mean, it's not only the space and missile industry now. Remember, the Port Canaveral is very important for the short-term cruise industry. It's like one of the most significant ports for that. Disney and Universal and everything changed the tourism, and so people go to the closest beach, and in my opinion, in the area, Cocoa Beach, because 520 takes you right over there.
That's right.
I go right there to Cocoa Beach, and so it changed Cocoa Beach, and also retirees became very, very important in Cocoa Beach in the 1970s because they came in and they were able to purchase very, very nice homes at reasonable costs because of the loss of missile workers. And so Cocoa Beach and Brevard County as a whole, but Cocoa Beach probably better than anybody, they reinvented themselves and reinvented themselves very, very successfully. And those structures, as a result of the community having to reinvent themselves, many of the structures had to reinvent themselves. Ron John's surf shop was the old Samoan lounge. So what was Ron John's, and not the big palace building that is there today.
No,
but the Ron John's that was
original.
Well, no, the original one was even someplace else, a little smaller, a little hut. But the one that was there like the 70s and 80s, over the old Samoan lounge. And so as the community changed, they no longer needed the Samoan lounge because they didn't have as many people coming to do business lunches and such. And so it became what the city was reinventing itself as a surfing mecca, as it is a surfing mecca.
So I have another question for you. When people think about laser scanning, I'm sure they think about computer scientists, and you've given them a glimpse into a historian. What other unusual, go wild for a moment, what different types of career paths could you see that could benefit from either being part of a team like this or actually being a client, using laser scanning?
Well, okay. Obviously, architects and engineers. So that's the big obvious one. You need the computer scientists to write new code to make better software to stitch, to register your point clouds. So computer scientists for that. For historians, and archaeologists and historians, it's just as important for an archaeologist to go and be able to laser scan a structure prior to its potential demise because of civil unrest. And as we saw in the Middle East, it was very important for them to get out there and laser scan some of these structures before they were blown up. Also, the tourism industry, it's good because if you have a site that is very delicate, you don't want people treading all over the place. So you may want to make a three-dimensional representation of whatever historic thing there is out there. And crime scene investigation is a huge, it provides, a photographer is great. I can photograph this room, but it doesn't provide me in the end a three-dimensional representation where I can be Columbo if I'm looking at a 3D representation, a point cloud of a crime scene after the fact. I don't have to wait and for them to say, where Columbo's like, oh man, the photograph doesn't show us this, and people have tread all over the place. I've got a 3D representation of it. Yeah. I can see all kinds of little clues and stuff. So it's very, very important for crime scene investigation. Rob, can you think of any other really, those are the biggies that for me that come to mind.
So I'm going to leave you with a statement because I think we're coming to the end of the hour. But what's super intriguing in all of these things is to think about the opportunities we haven't yet explored using the idea of being able to laser scan at that level and capture the past. And one of the things I'm thinking of is this idea of situational acoustics, contextual acoustics. Hearing a concert in a cathedral when the cathedral's standing, would it be possible? And a rhetorical question. And someone out there should think about this and study that. The idea of saying, I want to recreate a theater that's no longer here and be able to let you hear the acoustics that happened in that theater.
If you wanted to do that, you would have to have not only this laser scan, you have to have the materials as well.
Sure.
You have to know exactly what materials they use because each carpeting, I could change the carpeting in this office and the acoustics in this office are going to change.
Very cool.
Or I can change the draper. Well, I have a stupid, vertical blinds. I could put draperies in here, and that would change the acoustics tremendously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we're out of time. So on the last note, Dr. Walters, if anybody would like to learn more about your work or learn more about the Glass Bank, where can they go?
They can go to our website. It's the easy one is chronopoints, chronopoints.com. Right. They can look at some of the other point clouds that we put together and some of the other places that we've documented it. Something like the TWA terminal at JFK International Airport, and we've done the Jack Kerouac House, and big things and little things. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you.